So everyone, welcome to the webinar on open data and research strategy. This is the ViSuAL project webinar. ViSuAL project is a project financed by European Commission as an Erasmus Plus project for knowledge alliances. And this webinar is conducted so that I will open soon the open data and research strategy, which is deliverable 8.3 in the ViSuAL project, so that we can go it through. I can explain some topics in that, and you are all welcome to ask your questions and add your comments. And there are two possibilities for that. One is that you can just say something if you want to discuss, or the other option is that you can use the chat, so you can always ask questions in chat and add your comments there. So are we ready, or there are some initial questions? It seems quiet, so that's why now I would share with you my screen. And this is the ViSuAL deliverable for open data and research strategy. And in this deliverable, we have an introduction, data summary, then information about what is fair data, about allocation of resources for data collection and data management, then some topics about data security, ethical aspects, and conclusions. And for the introduction, this document is based on the guidelines for developing data management plans, guidelines offered by European Commission. And in the document, you also see the link to the European Commission's guidelines. And in these guidelines, there are also set 5 general goals for data management plans. And these goals have been somehow covered in our document as well. So it should guide all of us to think on how to handle research data during and after the end of the project. Then it should describe what data will be collected and processed, then which methodology and standards will be applied, whether data will be shared or made open access, and how data will be created and preserved. And what is new this year is definitely the link with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, that started, that were agreed on this year. So that now we have to follow those as well, and this document is done in consultation with one expert in GDPR. So that if you follow our document in ViSuAL project, then we are sure that we also follow the GDPR regulation as well. So, and then I would go to the first chapter what we have here. This is on data summary. And in data summary, you will see that there are 4 main purposes for the data, what we collect. One is that we aim to give feedback to the people, mainly learners and experimenters, about whom we collect data. So that, for example, when in the first phase we will collect data from our experimenters, then this data should be also give something back to the experimenters, so that the experimenters should get some useful information how to improve their skills in using video-based learning or collaborative knowledge building. And the same is with the learners. Actually, we should think in every experiment how this data collected about the learners will be useful for the learners as well. of course, the easiest way is that we can tell them that actually based on this data collection, this method will be improved, and then later in the next iterations, this improved method to use collaborative video-based learning for knowledge building will result in better outcomes with other students. Then the second goal is to conduct summative assessment of the products and procedures developed in the project with the aim to revise and improve these, so that if we have already some guidelines for using videos in learning, then we can improve these guidelines based on our data collected in the experiments. Then another very important aim here is to generate research outcomes. And this means that we have to say to the experimenters and to the learners as well, when we make agreements with them to run the experiments, to participate in the experiments, we have to make the agreements that this data is not only used for the project, but also for research based on the project outcomes. Of course, later we will introduce the activities what we conduct in order to anonymize this data and to safeguard all the persons involved in data collection. So, and the fourth aim is to document activities of the project and disseminate information about this. It means that we use this data in our project reports and also in disseminating the main findings and outcomes of the project, which means that this data will be in some format sometimes disseminated on our website, in social media, in Facebook, in Yammer, in Twitter, and in YouTube sometimes if it is video data, and in video blogs and text-based blogs as well. So then the second topic covered here is that what kind of or types of data we will collect. And we see that we have mainly videos, audios, and texts that could be collected either about the process or in the reflection phase on the process. And in reflection phase, we will see that there might be interviews and audio recordings or written transcripts of the interviews, but also written reflections done directly by the people who reflect their teaching or learning process. And in addition to that, we also use different questionnaires and sometimes maybe some tests about learning outcomes achieved in the experiments. So, what I didn't tell in the beginning of the webinar is that actually this document is an open living document. So it is a Google document that can be updated as we need. So if we see in our experiments that we collect some type of data that is not listed here, or we have an additional aim for an experiment or data collection, then we can update this document. Then it is important that all our partners and experimenters will give this feedback and suggest how this document should be updated. Then we have said that we only use original data in this project so that we do not reuse some existing data. Again, the data is collected mainly through video recordings and audio recordings, written materials, but in addition, what was not yet mentioned is that we also use the log file data and virtual dialog databases, mainly coming from Knowledge Forum and from different video tools used in the ViSuAL project. Each of those video tools have some features to record some information, and this information will be used as data in our project and in our research based on this project. And the next chapter is about fair data. And here it is important to think on the idea that is more and more understood and appreciated on the European level, that we use in our project European money, public money, and therefore European Commission expects that most of the data collected using public money will be made publicly available as well. And in order to make it publicly available, of course, we need specific permission from the people from whom or about whom we collect some data, which means mainly experimenters and learners. But in addition to that, we also have to think how to make this data findable to others, how we add metadata that is used in describing the data file, and in addition in searching that. So generally it is suggested that that every data set for that kind of open use of data will get the digital object identifier, DOI index. But this is a bit complicated, and there is a limited number of institutions who could provide this digital object identifier. And that's why we developed our own guides for describing every data set we produce in the ViSuAL project. But these guidelines are following what is expected in case of data sets that are saved, stored in a database, where in a repository where these DOIs are used. And in this case, there is a long list of information that is important in case of every data set. As you see here, there are 18 different topics. What it means that in our case, we see that the responsibility in storing data and in adding this metadata to the data sets that should be reusable is on the shoulders of the particular partners. So that every partner in ViSuAL project who collects data is responsible in storing and describing the data set. So storing is maybe easy, but of course you should have a safe server space where you can store this data. And then a bit more complicated is how to describe this data using the metadata elements described here. So many of them are very simple, and it's not much to discuss there, but maybe some of them need a bit more information. But what is suggested is to add a file. It might be just a text document to describe those topics. It might be a table, for example, where in the first column you have this information listed here, and then in the second is the information that is now specific to this particular data file. First, identifier. we should give a title to the data set, and we later propose a formula how to set the title, so that the title already has a lot of information about the data set. So the TOIs have a specific format of the titles, but we cannot use this right now because this also includes the number of the repository, for example, and the one who created the data. So what we need is creator coded in the title, so that we do not need special data field for that, but we will put in title we see that the title is the identifier, and in the title there is the name, the short name of the creator as well. And the creator we see here as one of the partners in the ViSuAL project. So the title, it is the same topic basically, so that we will put it together. Identifier is the title, and the title contains information about the creator. And then following that will come different specified fields, special fields, data fields. Who is the publisher of the data? Usually it is the same person who collects this data. Then publication year, so that the time when the data is collected. Here we could be a bit more specific to specify the data collection date as well. If it is not known, then you can just put the month the data was collected. So it is good to be as specific as possible. Then subject. What is the field of the subject field of the data, so that what subject area this data is. Then contributor. So who else have contributed in this data collection? One is publisher, and another one might be maybe the experimenter was a data collector, for example, or there were more than one observer in this observation data. That kind of information would be important there. Then date, which can go to the field of the publication year already. Then language, in which language this data is available. Sometimes it is in our mother tongue in different countries, but sometimes it might be in English. So research type. Then I have a proposal later as well that this could be also a part of this title already, to give more information already on the title level. Then we have decided that we do not use two fields specified in describing DOI-based data sets, but indeed we will see what is the size of the data, what is the format of the data. Format means here what type of file it is. For example, in case of text file, it might be a Word document file, or it might be a Mac-based Pages file or whatever, or it is Google document file, for example. So version, if there are some updates of this data, then this information should be added, that it is version 1, version 2, version 3. If there are some specific rights-related questions, then this should be added, and then description of the data is short, a few sentences about what this data is, and then where this data is collected, geolocation. Is it? It is usually said that what is the country of data collection. And then in the title, the idea is that it would be good to start every title with the project acronym, ViSuAL. Then it would be good to add the partner identifier based on the short names of our partners. Then object type identifier. So, for example, this is not a closed list, but for example, it might be a publication, a report, a news. So that kind of information could be in the title. Yes, I see that the title might be quite long, but then it has more information in it, and this is the suggestion we have. Then the category identifier, for example, is it a video, audio, test, questionnaire, narrative, log file, and this list could be extended. And then the unique numbers of the objects of the same type and category. So the first video from University of Tartu will, for example, get a title ViSuAL UT, then if it is a video report, report video 001. When we have the next video data collected, then it will get 002 and so on. And so this is the way we could see the titles. So, or just an example here, ViSuAL UT data test 1. So, and if we have done it in this way, then it's quite easy to translate it later to DOI system, which could be the aim finally with some very useful data sets for the future. So in the next section, the same is described already a bit more. So for example, the subject, what it should be, and so there is nothing more to add, but just some examples. And for example, in which format we expect the data, the date will be used, like day, month, year, all the characters, and also the language related questions, so that that there are some links showing you how to express it in case of metadata, and the same with all the different aspects. For example, in case of format, what kind of formats we see there might be, but you can follow those examples and then use what you actually need in your particular case. And then we thought that our data needs to have 4 more additional metadata fields, because the 16 fields described previously are those that are needed in case we would like to link our data set to an internationally open database where the metadata fields about data sets are expected, and where the data sets will also get their DOI. But what we need in our project, in addition, is that we also want to have information about the target groups, who are the potential users of that particular data set. In most of those cases, these are our team members, but we can also see that some data might be very useful for, let's say, the higher education institutions in our ViSuAL project. And in some other cases, this data might be especially useful for the education technology companies involved in our project. But not only in our project, but others as well. If the data is open, public, then some data might be also very useful for other companies focusing on video-based learning solutions. In addition, we can see that some data might be very useful for experimenters or teachers, or sometimes even to learners. So accessibility information about persons, groups, who has access to the data, which is important already in recruiting people to the experiments, because we need to tell to target groups this information, who has access to the data later. And sometimes also it is needed to add that if the data is anonymized before those people get access or not, and then according to that they have to give their permission to collect data about them. Then information about the usage of this data set, and this is an interesting field because this is also information for the project team about the, let's say, reuse of the data. Because in the European Commission, it is expected more and more that the data collected using public money will be reused in different situations by different partners. And especially interesting would be if this data could be used by some interested parties who are not involved in the project team. This is of course a challenge, but we hope that someday our data is really very much valued by other people, so that they don't have to collect the same data again and again, but they can link our data to their own data or to data from some other projects and make some conclusions, some suggestions for further developments based on synthesis of the data from different projects. And finally, we also found that it is important to have that kind of field where we acknowledge the people and the funding agency of the project, which means European Commission in case of ViSuAL project. And again, this is a preliminary list and that might be updated according to the needs. Then in case of keywords related to data, we also see that in order to make the data easily findable, we need keywords. And here we provide that the keywords should be selected from ERIC database. They have a list of keywords related to educational research, thesaurus. And using this list, we can describe our data, and there are some examples from this ERIC list that might be especially useful in our case. For example, in describing the type of the data, we might have qualitative data, quantitative data, test, questionnaire, interview. It was already mentioned before. In describing the respondents, school, lower secondary school, upper secondary school, we can be as specific as possible. In case of keywords that describe the content, there are keywords like video pedagogy, knowledge building, collaborative learning, and so on. So the more we use the same words, the easily other people find our data and could reuse it. Then the next idea what we have is how to make this data openly accessible. And here, very shortly, the idea is that we follow, of course, different guidelines how to ask this particular permission from the respondents. But indeed, we aim to make data openly accessible whenever it is possible. If it is not allowed by our respondents, then of course we cannot do that. But we try to explain why it is a special value there to make it openly accessible, so that every other person can also use this data in making important conclusions in educational sciences. So, but indeed, we have decided that in order to make it openly accessible, we take this task to the steering committee of the ViSuAL project, because steering committee is the most powerful, the institution with the highest power in our project. Then it is up to them to decide if the partner who stores some data and who is responsible in describing the metadata of the data in their repository, if they have followed all different guidelines and rules, so that we can really make this data set openly accessible in internet. And in this case, the link to the data set, the data will stay where it is in the repository of the particular partner, and then the link to the data set and to the metadata file, if they are provided separately and not in the same document, will be given and then made available through our project website. So then in order to access the data, it depends on the data type, and there is nothing specific, so that if it is a table in Microsoft Excel, then you need Microsoft Excel and so on. So that I wouldn't stop very much on this point, but basically this is already seen from the metadata of the data set. Then what else is maybe important is that because most of this data will be also used for research, then a bit more specific information is given about, let's say, data that is maybe used using data analysis software. Mainly, it is important in case of quantitative data analysis, but sometimes also in case of qualitative data analysis. And that's why we have developed some guidelines how the data tables, if your data is in a table, then how the data tables should be developed. So what is suggested is that in order to open the data files in different data analysis software, in, for example, Microsoft Excel or SPSS or M+ or Statistica, different others, you need to finally save your document in CSV format. And you can develop the data file in whatever format, but finally it should be saved in this format. So, and if you use some other options, then you should specify that, but we try to increase the reusability of the data file by using this format. So then it is important to specify that we will present items in the columns, so that in the columns there are different variables, let's say. Usually the first variable is the name of or the ID of the respondent. It should be anonymized, of course, in this case, and in the so that these are in the rows, and in the columns there are different variables we have in our data set. For example, I don't know, gender, age, then test result on each task in the test, and test result in some, and that kind of things. What more is important, that the names of the variables, the items in this case, should support understanding the structure of the data. So, for example, if you have a variable like gender, then please name it as gender or something like that. Here is the example. And then you need to specify what are the different values of the variables as well, and the values should be defined usually in a separate field, separate sheet of the data file, or in a separate document if needed. And then it is usually suggested to use numbers only in the main data file. For example, in case of genders 1 and 2, and then you need to explain what it means. Or in case of, I don't know, Likert type scales, 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, and in a separate document or on a separate sheet, you will explain what means 1, 2, what means 1, what means 2, or if you have continuous scale, what means the 1 and 4, and if there is not described what is in the between, then it is so. And one more suggestion is that, of course, it is good if it is intuitively understandable what every variable means, but if needed, then in the separate sheet you should explain it a bit more, or give the long version of the question, for example, so that everybody who reads the data understands what is behind of the data. But the data, in the main data sheet, the variable names should be intuitively understandable, but also on the other hand as short as possible, because some data analysis software still limits the number of characters of the names of the variables. Often it is set to 8 characters, so that if you manage to name all your variables with up to 8 characters, and there is still the idea that everyone will understand those items, the names intuitively, then it's just wonderful. So, and if you compute some variables, then this information should be also given in the separate sheet or separate file, and how it is computed, or what is this computed variable. So next, some ideas about how to make the data interoperable and increase reuse of data. So it is hopefully achieved through use of the metadata, the same format of metadata, and through making the data openly accessible. But in addition to this, it is also important that we will follow some common standards in presenting data. Just some ideas what we just discussed. Then the next chapter is about allocation of resources. And here we do not have much information, because in general it is so that we do not have specific resources for making data openly accessible, for example. So that it is an integral part of data collection and data storing process that is the task of every partner who is collecting data. And in some cases, maybe there are some additional permissions from respondents needed, and so that this is all what we need to do in our team, so that in this section there are listed just some ideas that could be reminded just in the beginning of the data collection. Sorry. So, and if there are some issues related to that, then we can also take this for discussions, first in work package 8, and if needed, then in the steering committee of the ViSuAL project. The 5th topic is about data security. And very shortly, we have decided that all data sets will be stored in the partners' databases, in their repositories. And so every partner is responsible in following the common principles to ensure secure storage of data and making regular backups of the data sets. And of course, it is something what could be discussed if needed, that if some data is collected in an international group, then the partners should discuss in which database it is stored. But in this case, we also need to inform the respondents that this is not saved in a local database, but by another partner. So, and we are sure that all the partners institutions have a good data security principles set in their institution, and so that we do not develop something that is specific to a ViSuAL project, and that's why it is not a highlight here. And finally, the ethical aspects in data collection and storage. ViSuAL project is a specific project in this sense that we definitely collect a lot of video data. In video data, the issue is that often it is not so easy to anonymize information there. Even though we have some video tools that allow anonymization of faces in the videos, it is not always the case. In addition to that, the audio is sometimes maybe recognizable. The people are recognizable there, so that we have to keep that risk in mind. And the easiest way is to ask for permission from the respondents if they allow us to use this type of data for our project, for our research, and all the other aims that we have in mind and that have been listed in the previous chapters of the same document. In case of infants, it is also important that we ask this permission from their parents. So one more topic to discuss is that if we are going to publish our data or present our data in conferences or some journals, then this information, then in this case, we also need to add that kind of acknowledgement to the data or to the study actually, that this study was conducted in the context of European project, Video Supported Knowledge Alliance, ViSuAL project number, and that it was funded by European Union under the Erasmus Plus Key Action 2 Knowledge Alliances. And then that this document does not represent the opinion of the EU, and the EU is not responsible for any use that might be made of its content. So that kind of information. Then one more important aspect, especially for the people involved in the project, in order to acknowledge the contribution of all partners who feel that they have contributed in something. We have developed that kind of guideline for preparing a publication. And here we mean scientific publications. Journal articles, chapters in different books, contribution in conference proceedings, etc. That kind of publications that are important for academic people, especially important for academic people, and where sometimes some people might feel themselves a bit bad and the situation a bit unfair if they are not listed as authors, if they feel that they have contributed somehow. Of course, then it is a discussion if we need to add some other people, but indeed, at least we need to somehow see this issue and the risk and to prevent it as good as possible. So, and that's why we have that kind of guideline here, that we need to share far in advance before the submission of a scientific document to present what is the preliminary title of the submission, what is the place it will be submitted, when it is planned to submit it, and what is the preliminary abstract and preliminary list of authors. And we expect that it should be done at least 1 week before the submission date. And we have decided that this should be sent to the steering committee email list, because the steering committee contains representatives of all partners. And in this case, the representatives are the ones who are responsible in asking, if needed, if they don't know already, from their members in the team, if they feel that on this topic, based on the title and abstract, this provided list of authors is what it should be, or if somebody from their team feels that actually I have contributed, or I feel that I would like to contribute in writing this publication. So, and through email, this should be sent to the steering committee, and then the steering committee members have to indicate if they see an ethical issue, and if they see that somebody else should be an author, and we hope that there are no issues, and we have seen all those potential issues before submitting something, and if there are any responses in a week, then it is taken as an acceptance for submission of this particular publication with this preliminary list of authors. And when the publication is accepted finally, then we are all happy, of course, but in order to see that this information will be disseminated within the project consortium, but not only, but beyond of that as well, then this information should be sent to the coordinator of the project, and then from that on, it will be disseminated to many other places. For example, we could publish it in our website. We could, if the restrictions are not restricting that, and also give some information in social media and so on. So then, what is also important in sharing our data and findings is to inform our respondents and participators, like learners and teachers, about the outcomes, what is found based on the data collected from them. But we also need to involve them already before data collection by describing different risks, what there are in this data collection and so on. And in order to make it more concrete, we have developed the consent forms for informed consents. And this is as an appendix of this document, form of consent to participate now in the experiment of Erasmus Plus project ViSuAL. And if for some particular cases, more specific or a bit modified informed consent is needed, then this could be easily done. But this is the basic informed consent form. So that can be used in hopefully most of the cases. We need those informed consents from the respondents we have. And this informed consent consists then from a bit of introduction about the ViSuAL project, about the aims, why we are doing that, about the procedure, what is happening if you participate, and where and how your data will be collected, used, managed. And then finally, based on this information, everybody has the right to say yes or no, I like or wouldn't like to participate. And then in the data collection, and then there is additional form about based on GDPR rules that we have to collect some additional agreements for some topics. For example, I give permission for use of all my personal data in the category of educational material and educational presentations in case of the curriculum, lessons, classes, educational purposes, or if available is necessary in school administrative systems. And then a special question about if it is okay for the respondents to be recognizable in the video and photos. So then they also have to circle this yes or no. And finally, they need to sign it, add their name, date, and affiliation, which is usually the institutions they are working in. And then we have a general email address, visualca@irs.nl, where it could be asked additional questions. And then we will manage those questions in our consortium. So, and as I said almost at the beginning, that this open research and data strategy is a living document, so that we can update it as needed, so that if you have any additional needs, any recommendations to update it, and just let us know. And this is a guide, so that this is not something that we definitely have to follow in all those places, but this is like a document that gives more safety in data collection and in following GDPR rules. So thank you for listening. And now it would be good to hear if you have some specific questions, comments, or if not, then we can finish the webinar. Are there some questions, comments? Yes, Alberto, please. I unmuted you. Yes, please.
Now I am unmuted, thank you. Yes, what I already have written in the chat, answering to Frank's comment. So I think that the consent form, as you showed it now, was a previous version of the consent form. And in this version, I don't think we can accept it in our institution. because there are too many issues that are not solved yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what I suggested, for example, was to, in the last part where you have the list of possibilities data can be used, instead of having only one general yes, no answer, to have specific answers. Because, for example, you know, we are in teacher education, our teachers teach, they are in-service teachers, so maybe they can be perfectly okay with having their data for scientific purposes, but not for social media, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So they wouldn't like to see their face on Twitter or on Facebook, but they would like to contribute to research. And in the actual form you showed us, this is not possible. So if they will have to select yes or no, they will choose the more restricting one, which is no, and we will be in many problems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you added this suggestions in your last comments, isn't it, Alberto?
Yes.
So I promised in the coordination team that I would go through the informed consent, and if we elaborate your comments in it, then we can update it in this document.
Great.
Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very good suggestion, and I would say that, of course, we can improve the general informed consent form as well. But in addition to that, I think that every experimenter and every partner who is going to run those experiments and needs this guideline, actually, I would say, need to adapt it to particular needs, so that if you see that maybe it is not specific enough, if you need to add a bit more specific question, then this could be easily done, so that it is not a fixed document, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's with many things in the project. There's no one size fits all. That's constantly what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good to communicate together about where the adaptations are made.
However, 90% of the form was okay for us too.
Yeah, but I will go through your comments, and I think this is a very reasonable one, which might also be the case in many other cases. So might be more general. Okay.
Can I just add? I think it's a very good point, Alberto, and I think it's also important that all the partners really make sure that all the partners are aware of this. It's a very important document. And just in terms of the privacy and use of video, in our case, for example, with Iris Connect, it is part of the design that videos cannot be taken away from the platform. So even if we wanted to use them for promotional purposes, we cannot, which is one of the key strengths of the platform. So I appreciate that the form needs to be adapted in every situation, and we will make sure we do that where our tool is used, because we don't want to give mixed messages there in terms of asking people to consent to sharing their videos, when our USP is that videos are secure on the platform.
Yes, so that there are some more questions in the chat.
Yeah, there I have some where the disclaimer is coming from now. Because the disclaimer, as it is formulated now, says that the EU it's not the opinion, but you don't know. It might not necessarily be the opinion of the European Union, and that's in. Rick was just looking at the official disclaimers. There are several in the EU Internet Handbook. So maybe the last one, you see also that there's necessarily, and also more extending to other bodies of the EU. And I was actually thinking maybe we should extend it also to ourselves, because it might be that also our own institutions are not necessarily having this opinion which is coming out of the project.
Yeah, it might be the case, so that of course we can modify to make it like bulletproof, the last part of the sentence, So that I think that most important is that we are aware about this, that this is something that should be mentioned, and that of course we do not know what is the official opinion of the EU, and but what is the message saying that we are not saying something on behalf of EU.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That is important, and that is enough for us. But that's of course another question, that should we somehow specify that this is not a shared opinion of our partners, so that maybe we should have a shared opinion in those cases. But yeah, I agree that if the authors are coming only from a few partners, then they are the authors and they will take the responsibility, actually.
Yeah. And it's good to be aware that this disclaimer should be on all products, presentations, newsletters, even on the websites and that kind of stuff, by which we go to the outside world.
Yes, and it is already in case of website and newsletter, it was used. Yeah. So that, and in case of our publications and presentations, so for example, in April conference, we also use the same.
Yeah, we will check this on if it's also on each of deliverables and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it was put, we have the PowerPoint presentation template, for example, it is already there in the template.
Okay, good.
Then there was one more question about should we have a list of possible target groups? And then the other, so that I think that is a good idea. I think that we can elaborate this document to give a list, but in general, yeah, the target groups are like the project partners, researchers, educational companies, educators, learners, that kind of list.
Or even specify a bit more higher education students, vocational education students, this kind of thing.
Yeah, and even more, even vocational education students, or in a particular field. So that I think that, or in higher education, we're going to specify that teacher education students or whatever. But I think that it is something that should be discussed in case of every data set, actually, so that we just have to think on that. That's the idea. So that if we see that it is more general, then we'll use the more general target group. But if it is targeted very specifically, then we will add a more specific target group name. Then the next question is that could spaces in some of the partners' names give any problem? And often it might be a problem, so that it is better to avoid that. Yeah.
I was asking just because I have seen on your list that some partners, for example, there was Flowbox Ltd. There was a space between Flowbox and Ltd. And a couple of other ones. So maybe we can propose shorter names or use the underscore to avoid space.
Yeah. So probably it's better to use the underscore in order to show everything what is there. Yeah. And so this is decided. So
I've got more a practical question.
Yes.
To all those metadata issues, it's not. I don't have a clear idea how and where we have to put all of this.
It depends now. I would say that there are two levels. One is if we use this data only for our own.
But I mean, are we making a kind of a template for it to fill all this information in?
Basically, these questions already are the basis for the template.
Yeah.
so that the template would be to put those questions in a column and to add another column to fill in this information. So that we can add this as one appendix to the file, and then that's it probably.
Jij zegt dat je in Word zo'n metadata kunt toepassen.
PDF, maar dan moet je wel een PDF bewerken.
Because, for instance, in the PDF, if you have a PDF elaborator, you can add this kind of metadata.
Yeah.
So it depends also on the software we use or in which we publicate, of course.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And of course, in case of Excel file, for example, you can add this metadata just as a separate sheet in the same Excel file.
Yeah.
And then later this could be used if it is stored in a database that is providing different fields for the metadata, because if this metadata is integrated as not metadata in the file, for example, in Excel file as a sheet, then it is not searchable. But if it is in the PDF file as a metadata, and if it is in a repository as a metadata, then one can search from internet for this particular data set.
So is the work package planning a kind of making a template for that or not?
It's not so easy, because what I said, we can provide, let's say, a Word document as an appendix, as we have now the informed consent form. Yeah. But it is the use of this is a bit limited, because it can be used if this metadata cannot be added to a particular document within the document.
Yeah.
So we can add this definitely, but it cannot be used in every case what we have.
Okay. And I have another question is actually listening to your lecturing. I was thinking that there are a lot of issues actually which are very relevant for the review of the experimentation descriptions, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? How the experiments have taken into account everything what we just what I just told or read from the document. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with you. But
this is a bit big, of course. So I was thinking, how can we get it in a more handsome, usable way for the review? Actually, that's actually the underlying question.
Yeah, what I would say is that what should be clear is that we have planned to collect the informed consents in every experiment. This is the must, I would say. All next to that is depending on how this data will be used. If this data will be used in a closed group and not shared with others, not made public, not shared with even other project partners, then there is no point to have very detailed metadata. I would say that in this case, it is okay if we use the title as it is written here. But when we are going to use this data and then share this data with others, then it is very useful to have all this metadata.
What I also mean, what are the most important issues that we, from the data collection strategy, that we have to take into consideration when we are reviewing the experimentation descriptions? For instance, I can say, or think about, are we getting learning outcomes? Is the data stored secure? That kind of issue. So maybe it's good if we could extract the very important things, which basically should at least be there in using the data in the experiments. Is that what we have to do or not?
I'm not sure that we can do it in a very simple way, actually. So that it is very difficult to decide if the data is stored securely, let's say, if to take this example. So that I think that this document could be as a guideline, and basically it is so that every data collector should somehow convince the respondents that they handle data, they manage data securely, and so that they trust the data collectors. If they don't trust, then they don't give the consent.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay. Are there any other questions that are not yet discussed? I tried to go through the questions in chat because it was not possible to follow those questions when I was presenting the document, but now I think that most of them are covered, already discussed in the webinar. Okay.
Thank you for your explanation. Very good deliverable.
Thank you for listening, and
very nice work. Nice, nice.